Last night, How to Be Christian uploaded a video that included a clip from my video on the Eucharist, in which he very fairly represented me. Excellent job. I didn't speak to him about this beforehand, but if he had said, is there anything you want included, it would have been the last part of that clip, warning people about subscribing to the channel. So I genuinely appreciate it. He made me sound better than the original video did. He did an excellent job. Now, on that video, I left a comment, and I basically said that the Protestants reading things into the Bible is real. I wanted to relate a story about that, about how seriously this can affect you. But in so doing, I also want to retract, sort of, a previous video that I made. Now, there's something that I've come to realize maybe a month or two ago, that a previous video that I made is wrong. In that video, I say that Paul and James contradict each other, and from the Protestant perspective that's being represented in that video, they do. But in reality, they don't. We're going to get to that. Now, if you're Protestant, the thing is that both Catholics and Protestants agree that these two passages do not contradict each other, but Protestants and Catholics have the exact opposite end result of these two passages, right? Which is why it was so obvious to me that they do contradict each other. And even after watching a few Catholic videos, etc., on how to read it correctly, I was like, nah, sorry, not convincing. So, how did I ultimately become convinced? Well, that's kind of a long story. I hope you got a few minutes. So, I was born into a Baptist family. My father is a pastor of a Baptist church. So from day one, from birth, I was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night. Wednesday night was prayer meeting. Tuesday night was visitation. Thursday night was Bible study. When I got older, Friday night was prison ministry, but I think that was only once a month or every other week or whatever. Go down to the jail and witness. Our daily bread devotionals, Christian school, whole 9 yards. I was raised steeped in it. And by the time I was 12 years old, not only had I been saved and baptized, but I wanted to be a pastor like my father. And I got a paper route, and I was saving up money and buying books like, the normal stuff 12-year-old kids buy, like Matthew Henry's commentary on the Bible, Strong's Concordance, Unger's Bible Handbook, Nave's Topical Bible, Vine's, you name it. Yeah, the Protestant stuff. I was buying it like every other 12-year-old. And so I was saved. I was a Christian. I was doing my thing. But by the time I was 18 years old, I went to Marine Corps boot camp. And I remember the last Sunday in boot camp. Now, this is a big deal in boot camp because the last Sunday you're moved up to the front by then, and they have a little deal for you because you're graduating boot camp. The following week, you're out of there. And I remember I turned to the kid beside me and I said, this is the last time I go to church. I was just there to get away from the drill instructors for an hour, right? And he was like, yeah, this is our last time at this church. I said, no, not this church. This is my last time in church, right? So between 12 and 18, I had done what my family would say I had completely gone off the rails. But the fact of the matter is, I had studied trying to get answers to questions that just either weren't there or weren't good. Now, flash forward another roughly 30 years. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm at my parents' house. And my parents who taught me once saved, always saved, right? So if you get saved by faith alone, you're always saved. But I met my parents for Thanksgiving. And please be gracious towards my parents on this because I am. And my mother commented that this might be the last time our whole family was together for a Thanksgiving meal until we get to heaven. Well, except Stephen, right? Which would be me. Don't you call me that, but that's what she calls me. So, that sounds harsh to a lot of people, but if you believe that your child's the path that they have taken is leading them to hell, then you should warn them about that. It was done with love, okay? This wasn't to embarrass me or anything like that. It's to wake you up, to make you think, what's going on here, right? So I appreciate what she did. I'm not putting her down for this at all. I took it in the spirit in which it was intended. But I also saw the irony, because we were once saved, always saved. So you're in a position now where you have to believe that a 12-year-old kid was saving his paper route money to buy, and Matthew Henry's commentary, for example, is a series of books, and he's saving his money to buy this stuff because he wants to be a pastor someday. But now he was never really saved. And of course, there's a verse, I think it's in 1 John, says something like, they were of us, but they went out from us. Or no, they went out from us, they were not of us. And basically, they read this verse to say that, you know, they were in our church, but they were never really Christians, right? They didn't lose their salvation. They were never really saved. So that's what my mother would have to believe about me. That as a kid, I was buying these books as an unsaved person, spending my paper route money to buy these books. I didn't lose my salvation, because you can't. Once saved, always saved. Now, why do I bring this up?
For by grace have ye been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, that no man should glory.
Now, I struggle with thinking about how to do this, because if I keep salvation in there, and you believe once saved, always saved, I don't think you're ever going to get around it, okay? But consider for a second that once saved, always saved might not be true. You can go research that on your own, come to your own conclusion, I don't care. If you consider for a second that once saved, always saved might not be true, and let's change that verse up a little bit, okay? So instead of Paul talking about salvation, Paul's talking about being filled from a meal. A free meal offered by the church. You don't have to sit through a sermon or anything. You just come out, you're hungry, we're going to give you something to eat. It's Friday night, we're just doing this for the community, right? So Paul says that by grace you are filled through the meal, and that not of yourselves, it's a gift from the church, not of works, lest anyone should boast. The question is, are you going to need to eat again tomorrow? Well, obviously you are. It's not once full, always full, right? You're going to need again tomorrow. Now, my point is not that these are interchangeable. My point is that if you take this out of the context of once saved, always saved, something we just believe and you do it and it's done and nothing more can be added, right? If you take that out of this context, then that ain't what the verse is saying. You're only reading it to say that you're saved by faith alone because you believe that once you're saved by faith, you're always saved and nothing else has to be added. But if that's not true, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Investigate for yourself. The point of this video is not to convince you that that's not true. It's simply to open your eyes to the fact that once you lose that doctrine, this verse doesn't necessarily say what you think it says. Yet here I was, after probably 30 years of being an atheist, okay? And I come back to the Bible to investigate things, and I'm still reading this verse like a Protestant. Because this idea of categorizing people into either saved or unsaved, and once you're in the saved box, you're stuck there, right? So I'm still reading this verse as if it literally says that you're saved by faith alone. It doesn't. Now, saying you are saved by faith is one possible reading of the verse, that you're saved by faith alone. The problem is when we get to James, James says that you are justified by works and not faith alone. So do these two contradict? Well, obviously, I thought they did. I did videos saying they did, but I was wrong. They don't contradict once you strip that reading. Again, maybe that's what Paul means. Maybe it does. But what we're talking about here is a contradiction. We're talking about two statements that cannot be true at the same time. And it cannot be true that you are saved by faith alone and that you are saved by works and not faith alone. Both of those things can't be true at the same time. Now, Protestants try to make them both true. Their way of making them true is what I was responding to in the other video. It was Pastor Mike Winger on this occasion. And basically their argument is that James is talking about being justified in the eyes of the people around you, right? So how do the people around you know that you're saved? Well, they know by your works, but you're really just saved by your faith. Now, he has a hard time explaining why James would say, can that faith save him? So Leighton Flowers has, I'm going to mess him up. How to Be Christian has a good video exposing that these are, right, two different kinds of faith they have to make up. There's a dead faith and there's a living faith and all this, right? Set all that aside for a second, because I take a different approach to the Bible than most Christians do. This argument is completely untenable for what James is saying, and we can find that out by looking at the example that he uses. So, Paul says that Abraham was justified by faith because the scripture says Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. Now, just bear with me here for a second, okay? I don't read that the same way Paul does. To me, when I read it, because it's he, him, it doesn't give you the name. It seems to me that the passage is saying that Abraham believed God and Abraham counted it to God as righteousness. In other words, Abraham believed that God was going to give him a child because Abraham believed God was righteous. But both Paul and James disagree with me. They say it means that Abraham believed God, so God counted Abraham as righteous. Fine, we'll go with that. Paul ends the story there. See, Abraham's justified by faith. Now, let me ask you this. No matter what your view, salvation by faith or faith plus works, is Abraham saved at that point? If Abraham gets hit by a bus the next day, which would be really weird, but if he does and killed, does he go to heaven? And I think both sides would say yes. Right? Abraham's going to go to heaven. He has faith in God. God counted it as righteousness. He's going to go to heaven when he gets hit by the time-traveling bus. Now, let's go to James. James says that Abraham indeed believed God and was counted him as righteousness, but that his faith was completed by the work of offering Isaac on the altar. So, does James think that if he got hit by that bus, that he would go to heaven? Well, I would argue that he does. But because he didn't get hit by the bus and he lived on to the point where God tests Abraham, as we are told in Genesis, and tells him to take your son and sacrifice him, what if Abraham said, you know what, God, I had to wait 100 years for this kid, pound sand. I'm not sacrificing this kid. Does James still say that Abraham is justified by that faith decades ago? Probably not. In fact, we know not, because he says that this fulfilled that scripture and that he was saved by works and not faith alone, by the work of offering his son. There's no contradiction here. We don't need to come up with some crazy explanation for James where he's talking about two different, being justified in the eyes of your friends. But let's ride with that for a second. Maybe he is. Maybe this is James trying to tell us that Abraham was found to be just. That he was, even though it says saved, you can't be saved because your friends think you're saved. But let's roll with that for a second. Let's follow that thought. Let's go back to the original passage and see what it has to say, shall we? The story that James is referencing here is the binding of Isaac. We find it in Genesis 22. I'm going to read it here from the English Standard Version. Follow along in your preferred version. We're going to go to verse 12. He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing as you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Now, you may or may not, I don't know if you've encountered this in church, but I know it's uncomfortable for some people because the angel of the Lord in Christian theology is Jesus, which would make him God. Even in my way of viewing things, the angel of the Lord bears a divine name, so he's speaking on God's behalf. So this is God here saying, now I know that you fear God. Now I know. But if we take Mike Winger's interpretation of James, who is citing this story, the angel should say, now your neighbors know. Now your friends and family know, right? But it gets worse. I'm about to do violence to the context. Just a warning. There's a reason for it. I'm telling you that I'm doing it. I encourage you to read the whole thing on your own. But we're going to read this in a weird way, okay? Let's go back to the beginning of the story. Genesis 22, verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham. Again, he's testing him because he wants to know. And he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. Abraham, Isaac, 2 young men. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy, who? Abraham and Isaac. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. We're going to go over there, worship, we'll be back, right? Abraham and the boy, Abraham and Isaac. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. Who? Both of them together, Abraham and Isaac. And Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood. But where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. Again, both of them together. Abraham and Isaac together, right? Now, what we're going to do is violence to the context. I'm admitting it, but follow me here. I'm doing this for a reason. We're going to go down to verse 15, and we're going to forget that we already heard from the angel of the Lord. Okay? And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time, it says here, from heaven, and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offering shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Now here's the thing. God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. If I skip that whole middle part and I come here, and the angel of the Lord says, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, it sounds like he just sacrificed Isaac. Then he goes on to say, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven. Again, it sounds like, hey, I'm going to make up for this. You're going to have a bunch of other kids, right? Let's keep reading. So Abraham returned to his young men. Where's Isaac? And they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. Wait, where's Isaac? Wait, they went both of them together. And Abraham... This is starting to sound like Abraham sacrificed Isaac, right? And why doesn't he go home to Sarah? Where's Sarah? Now after these things it was told to Abraham, verse 20, behold, Milcah also has borne to your brother Nahor, Uz's firstborn. It goes on. Now we go to chapter 23. Sarah's death and burial. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. What am I getting at? Just bear with me. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba in the land of Canaan, that is Hebron. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for... Wait. So Abraham stayed in Beersheba, whereas Sarah is back in Kiriath Arba. What is going on here? Mike is telling me this is a sign for the people around him. He never goes back to Sarah. Sarah certainly doesn't. We know that the angel of Adonai said, now I know. How does Sarah find out? And where on God's green earth is Isaac? The Hittites answered Abraham. You go all the way down through here. He buries Sarah. Where is Isaac? Isaac is completely missing. Now we go to chapter 24. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear. And this is where he sends a servant off to find a wife for Isaac. But where was Isaac? See, it almost sounds like, I'm not making the argument. Again, I did violence to the context. And obviously, if you follow the story, Isaac is around later. My point is this. If James wanted to pick a story to tell you that you have to somehow be justified in the eyes of your friends and family, this is the worst story he could have picked. Because it's only God who says, now I know. Abraham never goes home to Sarah. There's no word of Isaac anywhere until Abraham sends off to get a wife for Isaac. When Sarah dies, Isaac isn't there to bury her. But when Abraham dies, Isaac and Ishmael are there to bury him. It almost sounds like Sarah was mad at Abraham for what he did, and they got divorced. And maybe Isaac wasn't particularly happy with him either. And he came back to bury his father, like a good man. But he's completely out of the picture. And yet somehow Mike Winger is telling me that James picked this passage to tell me that you are justified by your friends and your family and the people around you by your works. Isaac would have seen the work. Doesn't appear to have been a big fan. Again, it's my interpretation. You can interpret it differently. But Sarah would have seen the work when he left, and she apparently said, don't come back, right? He doesn't go back until she's deceased. It's only the angel of the Lord that says, now I know. And yet somehow, Mike concludes that James' point in using this story was that God's not the one who justifies you by your works. It's the people around you. Now, the fact of the matter is this. If we read Paul without once saved, always saved in mind, then we can say that we are justified by faith, we are saved by faith through grace, and if we die the next day, we're going to heaven because we've been saved by faith through grace. But, by grace through faith, excuse me. But, if we live on from there, there might be some works we have to do. And that's why James would say that Abraham was justified by works, not faith alone. And he says, therefore, a man is justified by works and not faith alone. It's really clear to me. Now, you can read it again, however you want. My point here is not to convince you of the Catholic position. But there's all these hurdles I have to jump over and ways I have to read James and different types of faith I have to read into the text. And is it my friends? Is it who am I justified before? Can I be saved because I'm justified in the eyes of my neighbor? My neighbor. I mean, if I can, that's great news because my wife always says to me, you say you're not a Christian, but you are because of the way you live. So I guess I would be justified in the eyes of my wife and therefore I would go to heaven. Right? I mean, that would be great if that were true. But the hurdles you have to jump over in the text. And you're doing all this because largely, I think most people who are doing this do this because they believe this once saved, always saved. And they've been trained to put people in their categories in their mind. So when you read that these people that Paul is writing to were saved by grace through faith, you go, that's it. They're saved. Nothing can happen. No one can pluck you from God's hand, not even yourself. Of course, you can't pluck yourself, but I didn't mean that to come out the way it did. But anyway, this is just a bizarre reading of the text. But when you take the Catholic reading into consideration, and Catholics, of course, say you're not necessarily always saved. Just because you're saved now doesn't mean you'll be saved tomorrow, a year, 10 years from now. Depends on what you do, which matches what James said. And it doesn't contradict what Paul says because they concede that when you're saved by grace, it's through faith, not of works. But you might have to do works later. Now, again, I'm not a Catholic teacher, so don't take what I said, oh, that's the Catholic teaching. Get your teaching for the Catholics yourself if you want to. Or jump over the hurdles Mike Winger puts in the passage. I don't know what to do. You let me know in the comments down below. But if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, share it on social media, subscribe to the channel. Whatever you do, don't just sit there. Do something.